Hello everyone. In this video, we discuss a very important topic in AI, which is interpretability, and four different paradigms: behavioral, attributional, conceptual, and mechanistic. If you like videos like this, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and also leave comments to let me know what future videos I should make. So what is AI interpretability? Many modern AI models, like computer vision models or large language models, are black boxes, which means that we do not understand their internal processes and how to get to their final predictions. Here, for example, we have this squirrel that is falling, and we can give this to a vision model, and you can see that at the end we get a prediction that is most likely a bird. But we don't really understand how this model decided to produce bird as the most likely class, for example, using softmax scores. And of course, we can measure the quality of this prediction and say that, well, this is a misclassification and count that towards the classification accuracy. However, the point that we really want to address in AI interpretability is to understand how this model decided to produce bird as the most likely class, and understanding these internal processes. Therefore, interpretability is extremely important in modern AI by bridging the gap between model and outputs and human comprehension, meaning that can we find something from this model such that human can understand why the model makes certain predictions. And this is important to enhance trust and also enhance the efficacy of AI models. In order to get information about AI interpretability, there are four different paradigms: behavioral, attributional, conceptual, and mechanistic. And you can think of these as going from outside to inside of these models. What this means is that in the case of behavioral interpretability paradigm, it's very simple. We look at it as a neural network as a function that maps inputs to outputs. So in this case, we are now looking at all inside this black box model, but we want to know what kind of interpretability we can get by just looking at inputs and this function that maps these inputs to outputs. And you can think of examples of this as being methods such as sensitivity analysis or perturbation analysis. And this is doable or feasible here because we have access to inputs and to these functions, so obviously we can see their impact on the output. The main reason to use behavioral interpretability methods is because they are model agnostic, meaning that it does not exactly matter how the model maps these inputs to outputs, as long as we have a function like f here that we can evaluate these outputs for any given inputs. This means that we can apply these methods. And therefore, this means that you can apply these types of methods to models that are proprietary systems, like many of these large language models. But obviously, the downside here is that we lack insight into internal decision processes. Something that is a little bit more complicated and allows us to look inside this network is attributional interpretability methods. And in this case, we typically want to trace predictions back to individual inputs. And many of these techniques, they focus on something called gradients or partial derivatives, because in this simple case, if we have two inputs, x1 and x2, and we have the function or mapping and also the structure of the network here, then this means that now we can find, for example, partial derivatives here to understand the sensitivity of this output to these input features. Therefore, this allows us to understand feature importance for transparency and trust. But you have to be a little bit careful here, because this explains which features are important or they matter. But again, we do not really know why or how decisions are made. These are the important questions that we have to answer for truly interpretable models. And that takes us to something called concept-based or conceptual interpretability. And a lot of methods around these, they came out around 2020. So the idea here is that can we find high-level concepts or patterns in learned representations? So if we have a convolutional neural network and we have this input image here, can we learn some concepts that are easy to understand for a human? So in this case, you can see we have these concepts such as wing color and color of other parts of this, for example, here image, which is a bird. And this allows us to understand why we think this is, for example, a certain species. The challenge here is that, well, we need to have some kind of usually supervision on these concepts to be able to learn these concepts for new images or new data points. But overall, this is a very nice way of learning abstract knowledge that is embedded in our model, meaning that we are able to understand the internal processes of the network to some degree. The fourth paradigm is mechanistic interpretability, where the goal is to learn causal relationships that transform inputs to outputs. This means that we are not anymore just looking at correlations, but mainly to understand causal relationships. And this means that in many cases, we have to study neurons and what we call it as circuits, which is one way of thinking about this as finding groups of neurons that they work together to implement a specific function. I have a previous video about forming computation graphs for training neural networks. So this is very much related to that, where the goal is to understand which neurons they work together to get to a specific function. We have an example of this here, where you can see that we have two inputs color-coded by blue and red, and then we can, for example, show that we have this causal relationship, so these two neurons to get to a specific function, they work together, and this gives us this like yellowish orange one, and then this with maybe another neuron will give us what we really need to get to the final prediction. And therefore the goal here is to really understand algorithms or computational resources that the neural network has implicitly learned. And one way to think about the differences between attributional, conceptual, and mechanistic interpretability is looking at like when you look at a food, right? Attributional interpretability is just knowing what ingredients we have used, right? So it's a very simple question. In conceptual interpretability, we want to know which recipes were used. And in mechanistic interpretability, the goal is not just to understand recipes, but understand the chemistry of cooking itself, right? How different things combine together to create, for example, a new taste, or they change their taste when they combine together. I hope you found this video helpful, and don't forget to like and subscribe.